What is the Schomburg Center? To me, it is home. The place where we come to see who we really are, not just somebody else's reflection of who we are.
The Schomburg Center is a place of culture, it's a place of history, it's a place of knowledge.
The Schomburg Center, to me, is a repository of all of the things that has documented our sense of worth as a people.
For me, that means that it is a place of immense power.
The Schomburg Center is a public research library and a cultural institution.
For the study of the Pan-African world.
It is perhaps the best in the world.
My Schomburg Center is Arturo Alfonso Schomburg.
Arturo Schomburg said, Black history and culture and intellect exists at a time when most people didn't believe that. He collected those evidences, and that became the beginning of the collection.
And it has expanded and has grown to where it is now a world-class institution.
It holds over 10 million items.
There's no parallel anywhere that brings to light what we as people of color have done, what we continue to do.
Black culture is all of culture. The universals that animate everyone's life happen here for all people.
The Schomburg, for me, is one of the center pillars of Harlem. When I started the journey of finding out about Red Rooster and Harlem, the very first place I went to was the Schomburg.
Researchers from around the world come and use what we have here.
I could not have written just about any of the books that I've written without the Schomburg Center's archives, resources.
The Schomburg Center is much more than a library. We encourage lifelong learning and exploration.
The Junior Scholars Program is a Saturday program with students from 5th grade to senior year in high school to help them learn about Black history and culture.
Learning about my history is important because it teaches me who I am.
The Schomburg Junior Scholars Program is going to do nothing but uplift them.
So many talented and brilliant people have walked the corridors of this amazing institution over the years. From Octavia Butler to Toni Morrison and James Baldwin, Ella Fitzgerald, Alvin Ailey, and Harry Belafonte, who graced the stage in this room of the American Negro Theater.
This place evokes great memories. It was a gift to us in our community to really try to find that space to reflect expressions of Black experience. I just knew that the environment and what I saw these young African Americans doing was a place I needed to be.
What is my Schomburg Center? I'm standing here at the Cosmogram, which underneath holds the ashes of the poet Langston Hughes. On the evening when this Cosmogram was dedicated, people began to empty out of the auditorium. A jazz trio struck up, and to my amazement, Amira Baraka went over and asked Maya Angelou for a dance. And they started to dance on top of the Cosmogram, on top of the ashes of Langston Hughes, and I felt what a fitting way to kiss the memory of Langston.
The Schomburg Center is a research institute and a library, but it's so much more than that.
There's something going on every day.
So many amazing people come here to talk about their creative craft, to share what inspires them. The Schomburg Center's collections help to tell stories even beyond our walls.
The Schomburg Center is here in this exhibition at MoMA, One-Way Ticket, Jacob Lawrence's Migration Series. We depend on the resources of the Schomburg to enable us to tell this story. Thinking about the implications of the past on the present is absolutely crucial for understanding the next steps, understanding what we have to do to go forward.
We today have the responsibility of making sure that new artists and activists, new scholars and poets know that this place continues to be a resource and a source of inspiration for the work that we must continue to do.
The Schomburg Center is knowledge.
The Schomburg Center, to me, is education.
The Schomburg Center is home, it is family, it is foundational.
The Schomburg Center is inspiration.
The Schomburg is with me in everything that I do.
Community, inside and out.
The Schomburg Center is us.
The Schomburg Center is you, and we invite each and every one of you to find your Schomburg Center.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to Conditions in Harlem Revisited, from the 1936 Commission Report to today. I'm Rose Pierre-Louis. I'm the Executive Director of the NYU McSilver Institute for Poverty Policy and Research, and we are thrilled to be partnering for today's convening with the New York City Department of Records and Information Services, the Office of the Deputy Mayor for Strategic Initiatives, the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture at the New York Public Library, and Vital City. We're gathered here today because you care about Harlem. We've seen the cycles repeat themselves, and you are ready for change. Keep in mind that today's convening is 86 years in the making. It was inspired by a report that was submitted to then New York City Mayor LaGuardia in the wake of civil unrest in Harlem in 1935 and developed by the Mayor's Commission on Conditions in Harlem. When you think about the members of the commission, it was a who's who of Harlem's leadership and included A. Philip Randolph, County Cullen, Eunice Hunton Carter, and Oswald Garrison Villard. And you read the report and you see that many of the issues that they talked about on housing, employment, health, education, and public safety are issues that we very well talk about as a community and a village today. As someone who leads an anti-poverty organization and a proud resident of Harlem, when I read the report, the common refrain was that, heartbreakingly, many of the issues that are talked about in the report are the same ones that we talk about as a community today. When we look back to the members of the commission in 86 years ago, we know that they were experts. They were from the community and they had the answers. But I'm not sure that many of you know that this report on conditions in Harlem was never released by the LaGuardia administration. Fortunately, the New York Amsterdam News did release the report, and thank goodness for the Black press for doing so. So we have to ask ourselves as a community, which is part of the impetus for today's conversation, is what if? What if the report had been released by the city and implemented in the 1930s? What might be different in Harlem today? Fortunately, and with great thanks to the Adams administration, they have released the report. If you're interested in reading the report, you can see it online at harlemconditions.cityofnewyork.us. harlemconditions.cityofnewyork.us. You'll also hear today from the concerns of New Yorkers, about 62,000 New Yorkers, from the NYC Speaks initiative. And we also have people joining us via Zoom today, which is also very exciting. The next person I'm going to introduce is really the energy and the spirit for this convening. And she is Pauline Toole. She's the commissioner of the Mayor's Office of Records. She has a very distinguished career in city government and has been at the forefront of many important causes, which include establishing conversation groups for English language learners, launching the city's first ever earned income tax credit coalition, and coordinating the startup of the New York Capital Defender Office that provided defense attorneys in death penalty cases. It's her vision. It was her idea that brought Vital City, the Schomburg Center, McSilver together to organize this conference and to join with all of you as a community. So please give a warm Harlem welcome to Commissioner Pauline Toole, and she will introduce our plenary speakers. Thank you. Commissioner.
Good morning. So, I am explaining how we all came to be here today discussing a 1936 report developed by the Commission on Conditions in Harlem. And then I will call up our plenary panelists. I came across the report a few years ago in the municipal archives that are hosted by my agency, and I was floored by the content and the tone. I wondered why this report was virtually unknown. Every time I shared it with others, the response was the same. Wow, this is amazing. It's a forerunner to the Kerner Commission report. This year offered a perfect opportunity to focus on the report and ask, what if? What if it had been released? What if some of that hard-hitting analysis was actually acted upon? So we are emerging now from the COVID shutdown, thank God. The city's second black mayor has an ambitious agenda to make structural changes that address underlying disparities, and this is a time that we can learn from our past. In the summer, we held a series of focus groups with members of the Harlem community, spanning a whole age range from high schoolers to people like me, seniors, and they confirmed that this report from 1936 still had legs. It had relevance today. So let's recap. What happened in 1935 that triggered this? There was an act of petty thievery. Led to a small riot, an incident of civil unrest. Walter White, the national secretary of the NAACP, who was based in Harlem, urged Mayor LaGuardia to set up a commission to look into the conditions that triggered the violence. Others blamed communist agitators. Some called for the governor to send in the National Guard. But in the end, Mayor LaGuardia followed the sage advice of Walter White and appointed 13 very high-profile New Yorkers to serve on this commission. They promptly convened public hearings. The hearings covered 7 topics. The March 16th incident, which they probed in depth. They subpoenaed for that, or they requested representatives from the police department, the police officers who were on the scene, to testify. But on the orders of the district attorney at the time, none did. They looked at work relief, employment opportunities, housing, education and recreation, healthcare, public safety. And in these hearings were not like anything any of us have experienced. I can say that because over the summer, we located some of the transcripts from those hearings. They had been filed with another set of transcripts from a set of hearings that the Board of Aldermen convened on work relief. So basically, the council's hearings at the time. We'll be digitizing all of those transcripts and making them available for people, but what they clearly show is that those were some interesting hearings. The commission members understood how frustrated Harlem residents were. And so they agreed and offered all members of the audience the chance to jump up and question the witnesses. It was an amazing opportunity because there you were, having faced employment discrimination, being refused a job by the very expert, the head of the organization that was sitting on that stage, and you had the opportunity to ask the questions. The hearings were raucous, and they documented in a very painful degree the discriminatory experience of many black workers who were unemployed or underemployed. The report unflinchingly lays out the substandard conditions of schools and housing, as well as healthcare deficits and unconstitutional police practices. Its recommendations, in contrast to the body of the report, are somewhat tame. Steps that could be implemented quickly and some of which were already underway, such as building a new school. The report was circulated to relevant members of the LaGuardia administration. The commissioners made comments and rebuttals. Then the Harlem Commission submitted its final version to the mayor in March 1936, basically a year after the small riot. And despite requests, it was not issued by the city. As Rose mentioned, the New Amsterdam News did publish it. And in the 1970s, a small independent press also published the report. But basically, it's been sitting in the municipal archives waiting for some opportunity to make it relevant to a larger group of people. One of the main conclusions of the commission was that every injustice, every lack of opportunity stemmed from the economic reality of people not being able to earn a fair living. And so the Harlem Renaissance philosopher and scholar Alan Locke wrote about the report in 1936, and he described the Harlem riot as a lightning flash that, quote, brought the first vivid realization of the actual predicament of the mass of life in Harlem, and for the echoing afterpeals of thunder that have since broken our placid silence and Pollyanna complacency about it. So he was a dean, right, of the Harlem Renaissance. For no cultural advance is safe without some sound economic underpinning, the foundation of a decent and reasonably secure average standing of living, and no emerging elite, artistic, professional, or mercantile, can sustain itself in thin air over the abyss of a mass of unemployed, stranded in an overexpensive, disease, and crime-ridden slum. So 86 years later, we are here to discuss the report and to use this meeting as an opportunity to move things forward. One convening will not address the disparities built up over time, but today's conversation can be a beginning. So I'm going to call up our panel. But I also want to acknowledge the Planning Committee, Casey from the Schomburg, Rose from the McSilver Institute, Liz Glazer from Vital City, Brandon Anarati from the Deputy Mayor's Office. It was a very small group that over a few months put this convening together for people in person and those on Zoom, of which there are several. The biographies of our panelists are in the program, so in the interest of time, I am not going to read them, but I'm going to introduce Cheryl Greenberg. I think they're coming. A professor of history from Trinity College, who wrote about the report in an analysis of civil unrest in urban centers and compared the 1936 response to that in the 1940s. Bill Rogers, the vice president and director of the Institute for Economic Equity at the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, and Dr. Shango A. Blake, the co-executive director of New York City Speaks. Professor Greenberg will provide a historical context, what was happening in 1930s New York. Bill Rogers will provide approaches of an economic analysis, and Dr. Shango Blake will share data from NYC Speak survey conducted under the auspices of Deputy Mayor for Strategic Initiative, Sheena Wright. So we are going to move from this panel directly into the next panel in the interest of time, because we started a little bit late. So I'm going to ask the panelists to please join me, and then we will have a very good discussion and possibly some questions and answers. We have people in the audience who have index cards. So if you have a question or comment, flag one of them down. Here they are coming. And write your question or comment, and we will pass it up to the moderator and have a discussion about it. So we encourage participation. So we're going to start with Cheryl and go to Bill and then go back to Dr. Blake. Okay. And you want to sit in there's a regular mic here, or you can be at the podium, whatever your choice is.
Maybe I'll talk to the podium and then otherwise talk. Ooh, I'm short.
Can you hear me? Okay. First of all, I have to say how thrilling it is to be back at the Schomburg. It's the very first place and the best place I have ever been for doing deep research. It was invaluable and the people were wonderful, and it's really thrilling to be back here, especially up on stage. So an urban protest sparked by the rumor of police brutality turned violent. The press was all over it. Police and city administrators immediately blamed the violence on hoodlums and outside agitators. And sometime later, the mayor's office ordered an inquiry. Staff members issued a report asserting that the disorder was the inevitable result of racism and poverty worsened by racism. It recommended a thorough house cleaning of city agencies to address long-standing discrimination in housing, employment, education, health, the provision of services, and police brutality that had left Black, poor residents so frustrated and helpless that they exploded into violence. It sounds like reports issued after George Floyd's murder in Minneapolis, after Freddie Gray's in Baltimore, after Michael Brown's in Ferguson, first blaming young criminals and outside agitators, then after investigation concluding that the frustration with promises broken, failing schools, few jobs, and inadequate social services were and poor schooling and skills, were the long-standing grievances that sparked the reaction to the latest example of police violence. But of course, this was Harlem in 1935. And there's a reason that it sounds frighteningly like today. It's because the inequities and the injustice that the report flagged, its calls to action, were never fully addressed. I first encountered the Mayor's Commission on Conditions in Harlem in the mid-'80s. Yeah, I'm old. While doing the research for my dissertation and later first book, Or Does It Explode? Black Harlem in the Great Depression. I was struck that the Commission's findings were still true. The report was not yet history. And here we are in the 2020s, still seeing the same deprivation, experiencing the same protests, recognizing the same grievances. So I'm really delighted to be part of this exploration of the Mayor's Commission report about the Harlem disturbance of 1935 and the potential blueprint for action. Harlem, home to the Harlem Renaissance, hit bad times in the Great Depression, but actually there had never been a good time. Black migrants from the South and the islands, often with limited schooling and skills, moved there in hopes of greater opportunities, swelling the Black population here from 91,000 in 1910 to 327,000 in 1930. And what did they find? That the only housing open to them were apartments that poor white people had refused, and at high rents, since they were a captive population and couldn't go anywhere else. They found that virtually the only employment they could find was menial labor with no mobility, either in jobs white workers wouldn't take, or at wages lower than white workers doing the same job. Elevator boy wanted colored, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. daily, $65 per month. Elevator boy wanted white, 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. daily, $90 per month. As Adam Clayton Powell Sr. wrote, it cost an elevator man 365 extra hours and $300 a year to be Black. There were no laws against it. They found that racism might be less lethal in the North, but it was no less real. That even Black people with skills were relegated to service work. Black journalist George Schuyler wrote, turn a machine gun on a crowd of redcaps, which is a kind of a grim image, and you would slaughter a score of Bachelor of Arts, Doctors of Law, Doctors of Medicine, Doctors of Dental Surgery. Police looked the other way when they encountered prostitution, gambling, or liquor in Harlem and other Black neighborhoods, so they became vice capitals, where whites went for excitement and crime was widespread. And all this was before the Great Depression decimated the country. The collapse of manufacturing hit the unskilled first and most brutally. Harlem, already poor, became poorer. And it hit people of color more brutally. Last hired, first fired was the unofficial policy of the day. Even safe Negro jobs at the bottom became white jobs. Black professionals and those fortunate few who had found decent jobs lost them. Those who kept them found their income slashed. Unemployment, low wages, and the reality that city services shortchanged poor and Black and brown neighborhoods meant health worsened, crammed into these small, derelict apartments. So it's no surprise that Harlem's rate of death, illness, poverty, and overcrowding were among the highest in New York. 5% of the city, black people made up 15% of the unemployed. The average black family lived on $1,025 a year, which was lower than the WPA estimated was needed to maintain a minimum standard of living. But Harlem was not a poor slum, just a poor slum, as they called it. It was a vibrant black community with arts and culture, with newspaper, churches, and active political and self-help groups. A large population crowded into a small space might produce overcrowding, but it also created a tremendous pool for organizing. The NAACP, the Urban League, and Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association were all based in New York. A. Philip Randolph, and Adam Clayton Powell, champion of black trade unions, lived there, as did W.B. Du Bois. The Amsterdam News ran stories about discrimination and hardship and about those pushing back. Ministers spoke to huge congregations. There were fraternal and social and political clubs and organizations of all kinds. In other words, along with the deprivation, there emerged a greater political consciousness, an awareness that these problems were not individual but systemic and could be challenged together. And it was a potent voting bloc in a divided city. Harlem did its best to help its own. For example, in 1930, 17 churches formed the Harlem Cooperating Committee on Relief and Unemployment, which fed 2,400 people a day and provided clothing, food baskets, and occasionally jobs. But poor people can't sustain many other poor people for long, a reality intensified by the Depression. So when the New Deal came to New York with Governor and then President Roosevelt, with its promise of aid for the needy, Harlemites were ready. New Deal policies forbade racial discrimination, so black leaders demanded that the city live up to that promise, with equity in WPA and other hiring programs, equal levels of service, and relief money. Reverend Adam Clayton Powell Jr. marched in his entire congregation downtown to protest inadequate services. So surprisingly enough, did the staunchly separatist group, the UNIA, march with them. Despite the rules and despite these efforts, black New Yorkers were more often denied aid or placed in the lowest level of work jobs despite their actual skills. Depression Harlem remained poorer than other city neighborhoods, and that was painfully obvious. While New Deal programs did ease hardship, provide jobs, and improve health, whites continued to receive benefits more readily and see more improvements on every front. Encouraged by the improvements they had won and the at least rhetorical government commitment to their welfare, Harlemites' political demands became bolder and more public. The Consolidated Tenants League replaced the belongings of dispossessed people right back into their apartments under the very noses of the police. New groups like the National Negro Congress joined existing ones, holding pickets and demonstrations to demand fair hiring, higher relief grants, and better city services. These public protests often clashed with police, and each protest, all documented by the black press, educated more in the community, fostering a broad political culture. Perhaps the most potent of these was the Don't Buy Where You Can't Work campaign, which demanded that local white store owners hire black clerks. It was part of a nationwide movement beginning in around 1932. And the local effort enjoyed some successes until it was shut down by the state courts in late 1934. Black clerks who had been hired lost their jobs. So not surprisingly, it was these very same white stores that faced the bulk of protesters' wrath in 1935. In fact, I argued in an article that the violence, which happened only a few months after the court ban, was an unfocused form of political action when more organized avenues of protest were shut down. In any case, the powerful sense of shared grievance, the frustration and anger, along with the recognition of the potency of mass action, led to the explosion of protest and violence in March of 1935, after rumors circulated, later proved untrue, that a white police officer had shot and killed a black young man. Picket lines and leaflets spread the news and called for mass demonstrations. Thousands took to the streets, and by the evening, protesters had broken windows of white stores and began looting. But these were not hoodlums. Arrest records that I uncovered revealed a broad cross-section of the Harlem population was arrested for disorder. The Mayor's Commission concluded that, and here's a quote, even grown-up men and women who all had suffered years of privation, seized the opportunity to express their resentment against discrimination in employment and the exclusive rights of property. So based on hearings, interviews, and extensive research, as you've heard, the commission, who in fact was a really impressive group of black and white experts and scholars, specifically identified as causes of the disorder discrimination in employment, brutality and racism by police, overcrowding, poor housing and health care, high rents, and inadequate social services. The events, they argued, acted as sparks falling on long, smoldering resentments. The crowd had responded not just out of anger, but from a knowledge that the event was not isolated, but systemic. And so the mayor's commission drew its conclusions, echoed down through the years virtually without change. Quote, "There is solid ground for the bitter resentment of the people of Harlem. The very susceptibility which the people in the community showed towards this rumor of the boy's death was due to a feeling of insecurity produced by years of unemployment and a deep-seated resentment against the many forms of discrimination which they had suffered as a racial minority," unquote. I hope now we can begin to heed their words. Thank you.
Good morning. Wow, it was much better than what I heard from downstairs. It's really a pleasure to be here with you all. This is not my first time to speak at the Schomburg. I was here a number of years ago, and so it's wonderful to be back. And this is my second sort of in-person conversation I've had since the pandemic, so I'm still wiping off some of the rust from the pandemic. But I want to first thank the organizers for asking me to be part of today's conversation, and that hopefully continue to be involved in this conversation. It's just so important and imperative. And what I've been asked to do was to talk in a broader context about the report. And to do that, the first thing I have to do, and I'm still getting used to it as now being at the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank, is I have to say and share with you that everything I share are my own feelings or views, and not the policies and approaches of my bank and the Board of Governors. So, some people are wondering, why on earth did you go to the St. Louis Federal Reserve? And the answer is simply, about a little more than a year and a half ago, they created something called the Institute for Economic Equity. The Institute for Economic Equity. And it was the bank's foray into wanting to talk beyond just monetary policy, right? That wanting to communicate and share and express to people and teach people that full employment, okay, to be at full employment, that doesn't mean having a black unemployment rate that's twice the white unemployment rate. Right? Full employment doesn't mean having higher poverty rates, right, in predominantly black communities or Latino communities, or even in low to moderate income white communities, right? And so, we are, it's a work in progress, because we are having challenges around, being called out for our work. Most recently, Tucker Carlson made reference to us, so we feel like we've really made it. It's very rewarding work. I've got a great staff of researchers, and it's a lot of how I felt when I answered some of the questions on do I want to come there, is that everything I've been doing prior to the bank was a dress rehearsal, and now with the pandemic, now with inflation. I was in Ferguson a few weeks ago, right? That all this whole sort of kaleidoscope of issues, it's now showtime. It's been showtime, but especially now. So what I want to do in the remaining part of my time is just to talk with you, not about the data. My staff has put together a deck that we'll be happy to share with you all that does comparisons of the then and now. But what I want to talk with you around is about the analysis and the narrative, or narratives, right? Because one of the next steps is, well, how do you educate, how do you galvanize, right, the community? And these are the conversations that we're having today. This is a conversation we're having in St. Louis. This is a conversation we're having in Louisville, These are major cities in my district, the 8th district. But beyond the 8th district, right, these conversations are happening. So how do you harness this amazing research and get it out to the public and educate the public and ultimately, right, change policy, and not just policy, but changing our practices, right? Changing how our practices, changing how we want people to live. So I'm not going to talk about the data. I'm not going to talk about I'm going to talk about analysis and narrative. And what was really amazing when Pauline told me about this report, I said, oh my gosh, this is very similar to something Dr. King wrote in 1966. He wrote an article in The Nation magazine in March of 1966, and I'm going to talk with you a little about it, in that it provides one of several cases on economic equity that I've been working on over the last year. This is and the new report that we're talking about today also provides another case for economic equity, and I'll share with you what I mean by that in a minute. But I'll also share with you 3 other important cases for economic equity. Why do I want to share them with you? Well, I think these are narratives that you can use in your own work. These are frameworks or cases for equity that you could use in your own work, whether it be academic work, scholarly work, or community involvement. And these 3 are a deferred maintenance case. How many of you all remember the Fram oil filter commercial? What was it? The Fram oil filter commercial? There was the famous line, "You can pay me now or you can pay me later." Right, now you know. But that's going to be one of the key cases for equity we're going to talk about. Another is, how many of you have you heard of the concept called ALICE, where ALICE stands for Asset Limited Income Constrained Unemployed? Well, I'm the brother of ALICE. I taught at Rutgers for about 10 to 14 years, was a part of United Way of Northern New Jersey, and helped to put together the ALICE concept. We'll talk about that in a minute too. And then the final case for equity is a business case that comes right out of this report. So let's quickly talk about Dr. King's economic equality message, or also another historical narrative or message of equity, or case for equity. In this 1966 article, he wrote that Negroes have benefited from a limited change that was emotionally satisfying but materially deficient. And the point here is jobs are harder to create than voter rolls or voting rolls. That's what he said in 1966. Jobs are harder to create than voting rolls. And today, I still think that statement is quite true. There are challenges we're seeing in Georgia and many other states, but still, on the balance, to me, the evidence supports his statement. And what did he do in this article? He basically said, well, jobs are not necessarily equivalent to security. He said that blacks are often undercut by layoffs. Blacks are hit hardest. They're the first fired, last hired. Discrimination thwarts long-term employment, which negates building seniority. Blacks need full-time and full-year employment. They need promotion and development opportunities. They need employment that feeds, clothes, educates, and stabilizes a family. Declining unemployment rates veil the lack of black jobs quality. Employment instability reflects the fragility of black ambitions and economic foundations. The chilling thing here is, similar to today's report, all of those indicators that Dr. King cited in 1966 are still at play today. They're still at play today as historical case for equity. Right? And many of the reasons why those indicators are still, we need still to address them, is something that, again, at my institute, we focus on structure. We focus on institutions and how they have, not just contemporarily, but historically, have played a role in still making that statement that Dr. King made very relevant. The deferred maintenance case, that's simply something that I developed around utilizing some concept the United Nations has, and it's called human priority investments. What are human priority investments? These are investments in education and training, so human capital, but they're also investments in social capital, okay? Investments in unemployment insurance at the national level, state level, but also investments in a wonderful center where we're sitting today and dialoguing today. Right? Libraries, YMCAs, right? Not all the different nonprofits that provide social service, right? And what has happened is we have slowed our investments in human priorities, local level, state level, federal level. And whenever we've slowed those investments, that's when we've seen inequality rise, inequality expand. Okay? Our latest conversation around human priorities was the pandemic. That the pandemic increased awareness that we need to expand infrastructure investments, but beyond bridges, beyond roads, and beyond broadband, but to these social capital, to mental health, and to quality child care. Okay? Yes, my economist friends who will tell me, yes, these have cost. But I say back to them, and this is missing part of the conversation sometimes, they have benefits. And those benefits exceed the cost if we're done right. Okay? That they can raise worker productivity, which at the end of the day is one of the mechanisms for how we see wages and compensation grow. Okay? These investments I've been writing about lately can help to improve the job matching process. Right? That if you provide access to affordable, good quality child care, that allows moms and parents to be able to accept jobs and be able to build tenure on those jobs. I won't go into it specifically, we'll talk about it in the Q&A, but these investments in human priorities also will help to restore resiliency, right? Which is something that is needed particularly after the pandemic and now we're dealing with inflation. Talk about ALICE. Some quick thoughts about ALICE. As I said, ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, and Employed. You can write it down if you want, okay? or I guess type it into your phones. But ALICE is the share of households in your community that don't have or don't achieve a survival income. What does that look like? Well, depending upon where you live and the size of your family, that can range from $40,000 to $70,000. The interesting thing here is we're not talking solely about people who are, as the government defines it, is in poverty. Right? We are talking about middle-income families. Right? Middle-income families whose disposable income, that is income after paying all their bills, taxes, et cetera, has dwindled, become very small. Right? These ALICE families are families that they're not going to Disneyland. Right? These are families that are increasingly having their resiliency challenged. One of my favorite charts that we created early on in this process, and that my colleagues at the United Way of Northern New Jersey have updated and expanded, is a chart where we identify all the budget items that ALICE has. So housing, childcare, food, transportation. And then we have a column that says, here's what happens to ALICE if she doesn't have these items, or has difficulty achieving these items. But given what we were trying to use this for getting more people to volunteer, to donate, to affect public policy, the second column was the more important column, and that is, what does it mean when ALICE doesn't have good child care, housing, and clothing for not just her, but for whom? For whom? Community. Right? So we built a narrative around this to help people understand that if ALICE doesn't have good access to health care, right, that has an impact on our hospitals and on the way we provide health care in that community. Okay? And you may be a zip code or a few miles away, but it impacts you. The last case that we've developed is a business case. Is a business case for equity. And I didn't have time to do the estimates for Harlem, but we've done them for St. Louis, and we've done them for Louisville, Memphis, and Little Rock. And we're actually going to be focusing on 21 zip codes, kind of a similar type of conversation here, but in St. Louis. And these are zip codes that have structurally had major difficulties growing and developing, not just decades, but generations. And so what we've done is we created an estimate of black buying power. And you can do this for Latino buying power, but we focus on black buying power. And just to give you an example, we found that in St. Louis, if we were to equate, and again, there's no silver bullet, there's no one menu of how you would equate household incomes between blacks and whites. But if we were to do that in St. Louis, that would raise black buying power by about $6 billion. Okay? Can you imagine what that number is for Harlem? Right? Okay. And then the next step we did was we broke that buying power into the different industries, the different sectors that are in the community, where we were then able to go and say, hey, Panasonic, we did this in Newark, it's Panasonic, so this was entertainment. Or if you looked at home and housing expenditures, right? Roughly 30% of a household on average, right? And go talk to those businesses and say, this is the dollars you're leaving off the table by not investing in your community. Okay? The narrative, right? The narrative. So where do we go from here? Okay? Where do we go from here? Well, the answer to that is complex, right? COVID and now inflation amplifies the consequences of not linking a job to economic security. The pandemic and inflation continues to amplify the following. One, how do we ensure that people have the skills that provide lifelong economic security? How do we accommodate the need to balance their jobs and with caring for their families? How do we ensure that all workers have opportunities and that our diverse population works in safe and fair workplaces? In sum, what type of way of life do we want folks in Harlem, folks in Newark, folks in Hopewell, where I live in New Jersey, my new friends in St. Louis? How do we want them to live? What's their way of life? I posed this question to my staff the other day. I have a lot of young 30-somethings, and they love doing this research, but I was like, ask them, what keeps you up at night, right? And so we're having those exercises. But the question is, there's young children too, but longer term, right? That's what's keeping them up at night. Why are they? What's their passion? Why are they doing this work? And I hope that each and every one, based upon this report, ask that question to themselves. The last important point I want to make too about this is that this is an important question about way of life because there are many low and moderate income whites who've had their way of lives erode. Okay. Many look like those in Harlem and black communities throughout the United States. We're at a fork in the road. We really are at a fork in the road that we can let those differences, that erosion be divisive, or we can choose to figure out how to create coalitions and sort of build back or rebuild that and also provide greater and better ways of life for a variety of families and communities that haven't had that. So that's where I'm at today on my journey. So thank you, and I look forward to the conversation.
Good morning. I'm so happy to be here at the Schomburg Research Center. The last time they let me speak out in the hallway, so now I get a chance. I get a chance to be on the stage. And Schomburg is to research what the Apollo is to entertainment. You want to be on this stage. I'm Dr. Shungo Blake, co-executive director of NYC Speaks. And I couldn't help but think about my presentation as I was listening to my colleagues here talk about their work and some of the historical implications of the work that we're doing right now. You know, we heard about the riots and the rebellions and people being upset about the conditions in the community, and it reminds me of an African proverb that says, a neglected child will burn down the village just to feel its warmth. And think over that. That when we talk about engagement and we talk about civic engagement and bringing people to the table, it says that you're important. We want to hear from you. We want to engage you. We're not going to ignore you. And a lot of times when we hear about the civil unrest and we hear about the racial strife, a lot of it is rooted on doing the very things that were taught, doing the opposite of the very things that was discussed. No coalition building, no consensus building, no everybody staying in their little box, polarizing the issue, Carlson Tucker, right? That's what happens. So I'm very excited to talk about the work that we did at NYC Speaks. We took a very radically different approach to civic engagement, which resulted in the largest civic policy council survey in the history of New York. Over 62,000 New Yorkers participated in the survey, and 18,400 young people between the ages of 14 and 17 participated in the survey. And a lot of time absent in the discussion around how do we solve the problems of our city is the voice of young people. So we were very excited that they were actively involved in this process. We call this research the FUBU of research. How many people remember FUBU? All right, all my old heads, right? There you go. For us, by us. It's very important that I point out this process. The individuals who developed the survey, they were New Yorkers from a diverse set of neighborhoods, diverse ethnic background. They were subject matter experts and people who brought shared living experience to the table. And we organized these, what we call policy councils. And these policy councils, these were the individuals who were responsible for developing the survey around specific policy agenda items, things like racial justice and equity, education and youth development, workforce development, economic vitality, arts and culture, mental health and wellness, education and youth development. And these policy councils, all New Yorkers, now we're from New York, so you understand getting New Yorkers in a room to get them to agree on what are going to be the three major questions to ask is a feat, because we are opinionated and we are passionate. But we were able to come to consensus and build out this survey that had a specific critical lens of looking at the impact that policies have on Black and brown communities. And that was phase one of our work. Then we went to phase two, which was the distribution of the survey, using community-based organizations that were credible messengers in the community to go to communities that historically are not represented in research. The voices are not present. I grew up at a time where there was something called, I don't know if it still exists in this new world, but it was the Nielsen ratings. Remember that? Nielsen never came to my house. Nielsen never asked me a question. So we wanted to make sure that we didn't do what the Nielsen ratings did. We wanted to go into places like Central Harlem, South Jamaica, Queens, South Bronx. We wanted to push out into neighborhoods that are historically ignored and ask them, what do you think should be the top priorities of the Eric Adams administration, top policy priorities of the Eric Adams administration? So this wasn't, what's your opinion? How do you feel? What do you think? We were asking for solutions. And if you want to understand how to solve a problem, go to the people who are most impacted by the problem, and they'll tell you how to solve the problem. And so that was our intent. And so we went out into these communities and we used these credible messengers to engage. And this was in the height of COVID. And so these messengers were armed with iPads, and they stopped their neighbors in the street. They went door to door, and they collected the data. After we got all the surveys done, we did another very important piece, which was to start something that we called community conversations around the data. Because we wanted to make sure that the people who were interpreting the data were the people who were impacted by the questions that we asked. So this wasn't about sending it off to an institution of higher learning with researchers, which is no problem, but that wasn't our approach. Our approach was we wanted to go to the people and say, what say you? So if the data said that people in Harlem felt that the #1 issue to public safety in terms of solving that issue was increased affordable housing, which they did, we wanted to have a community conversation around that. We wanted to know, is it more nuanced? Do you think they're correct? If they're not correct, why? And so we had this quantitative research with the survey, and then this robust qualitative research with these community conversations, all leading to something that's very important. Because as I listen and reflect on the fact that the LaGuardia administration never released the initial report, and then you hear that in 1980 there was another effort, and here we are in 2020, and we're doing it again. The thing that is striking at me is that we have the report. We know what the solutions are because people are telling us what the solutions are. The problem is we haven't had any action on the very problems that we're talking about. So what we sought to do was to create this action planning period where we brought community leaders, we brought people from the Eric Adams administration, executive leaders from the different agencies. We brought all these people together to try to build consensus. Because what ends up happening with administrations are they don't know how far they can commit to something. Can we be real honest about that? And so there's this little tension and tug of war that happens in the process. So rather than release a report and say, this is what New Yorkers are saying, and then say to the city, this is what you should do, we said, let's bring the city in on the process. Let's sit down together and figure out what can we build consensus around, what are the action plans that we can focus on, and what are you willing to commit up front? And then we can jointly release and begin to move to the part that speaks about action. And so that's why, to me, it's more than a report. It's a civic engagement strategy process to begin to get people involved, back connected to the leaders that are supposed to represent them. We have voter apathy now. We have people who have checked out. That's dangerous. We have to find a way to bring people back in, but we can't play with people. We can't do it as a photo op or do it as something that just says this is a box that I checked. This has to be real. It has to be meaningful because in this moment, at this crossroad, if we don't, then the alternative is scary. Coming off of COVID, we saw George Floyd, we saw Ahmaud Arbery, we saw Breonna Taylor, we saw the White House, the Capitol, under its siege. This is all a result of people checking out, forming their own opinions, sitting in their own silos, connected on social media, talking to only people who think like them, forming narratives, ignoring research. So this is important. This is critically important. So I want to share some things that we found out specific to Harlem. And it's interesting because a lot of the things that were answered and suggested or said that this is what we want the top priorities to be really were in alignment with other parts of the city. So when it came to the top 3 priorities in Harlem, one was public safety, the other one was education, and the other one was housing. And interesting enough, the through line between these 3 was housing. Housing showed up in public safety, housing showed up in education, and housing also showed up in housing. When asked, how can the government make your neighborhood safe, Harlem residents said, build more affordable housing and reduce homelessness. When asked what resources should the city government provide to people who have previously been incarcerated to help them rebuild their lives, Harlem residents said create employment programs for justice-involved New Yorkers. Harlem residents wanted also accountability for police misconduct. When it came to education, Harlem residents wanted increased hiring and salaries of diverse teachers and staff. Interesting enough, young people who took the survey said they wanted more mental health services in schools. And not only did they want more mental health services in schools, they wanted those mental health professionals to be better trained, to understand young people from the perspective of their culture, which I thought was interesting. And as it relates to housing, Harlem residents talked about rent stabilization. They wanted greater rent stabilization. And this kind of was in alignment with other parts of the city, specifically communities that were served, that were residents were predominantly Black and brown. In addition, a through line throughout the survey, and it also really, you see it in the zip codes of Harlem, but you see it throughout the city, was this connection between housing and mental health. And the young people described it as, in our community conversations, as that actually it was the 3, the incarceration, the mental health, and the housing were all interrelated. That often that the housing and the economic issues triggered mental health and then also led to decisions that were made based on poverty that would lead a young person into the criminal justice system. And they couldn't identify which one triggered the other, so it was almost secular. It was just this circle of an ecosystem of from housing, poor housing, to feeling unsafe, to triggering mental health issues, to incarceration, and it just continued to go on as a cycle. So again, we understand what the issues are. We're currently right now at NYC Speaks, finalizing our report that we have worked with, like I said, the Eric Adams administration, working specifically with Deputy Mayor of Strategic Initiatives, Sheena Wright, and the various agencies within the Eric Adams administration to come up with some real practical solutions that we can all agree on. Thank you.
Well, our great panelists certainly set the stage for the rest of the day. And I want to thank them all for sharing their wisdom with us. It was great, and it fits together. It's all of a piece, right? We ran a little long, which is okay, because we built in some time. We have one comment or question from back here. So we are soliciting comments and questions. There's one over in that other aisle as well. So we're going to quickly get to those. And then We built in a little extra time because we anticipated, this is the kind of conversation that could go on for a while. So when we conclude, we'll step down and have a photo taken to document our presence here. And we'll ask the next panelist to come right up and we'll get started. So there will be no break. My friends, I'm going to try and do something to synthesize. Well, this several I can.
May I ask a question while you're?
Okay, there are several questions that kind of go together, and the answer to them is like, are you familiar with the lexicon of Dorothy Day? Why does this country continue to fear communism when it is in fact communitarian? Did the commission consider J.P. Dunn's paper, The Mortgage Evil? Did Jane Jacobs have access to the LaGuardia report? What impact did it have? Were opportunities for vocation for fulfilling one's calling considered for poor populations? They're all good questions, but the answer is we don't know. So we're not going to be able to discuss those at the moment. So there are several. I don't think we're going to be able to get to all of them, but here's one question. Why doesn't the percentage of African American teachers reflect the percentage of African American children in New York City schools? What do we do about classism in the black community? Does anyone want to tackle that? Your microphones, don't tap them. But anyone want to tackle that question?
Well, being that I'm an educator, I'll tackle that one. The short answer to that question is systemic racism is the reason why you have an inequity and an imbalance between the percentage of students that teach in teach in school. I mean that go to school and the teachers that teach them, the issue really is about recruitment and retention and support. We have in this country several young people that would make great educators, but they're not attracted to education because of the salary, all right? And also, they are not attracted because we haven't really reached out to engage them. I mean, when you think about the historically black colleges and universities in the South, and everybody wants to come to New York. You know, the opportunity to bring those young people and give them an opportunity to teach here in New York, I think that's a great resource that we are not tapping into. But again, it connects right to the NYC Speaks data. Who's going to come to New York if the housing is not affordable? So we miss out on in the black community, many of our children go to these HBCUs and they go down south and they don't come back up to New York. They stay there because they see greater opportunity there than here, and that's part of the problem. In my other life, I'm president of an organization called Black Influencers United, and one of our actionable item agendas is just that, to increase the number of black teachers working in the school system and then to create opportunities for those educators to be promoted, to elevate to the highest level of the system so that those perspectives and those point of views are there when you start talking about policy and curriculum.
Thank you. Here's another question, I think, Cheryl, this probably goes to you. How much of the frustration of Harlem residents in 1936 was motivated by secret plans to change Harlem, new development, destruction of buildings or hospitals without community input?
I think the frustration was more that no one was investing in Harlem. That, I mean, I'm not disputing that the city had other plans. But the problem was that there was all sorts of public housing being built. None of it was available to black people. There were all sorts of opportunities being provided, none of them in Harlem. So absolutely, the idea to sort of what we would now call gentrify Harlem was an issue, but much more pronounced was the fact that none of those opportunities were in fact really coming to black people in Harlem. So yeah, the idea that white people want to take over places that are looking fun is historically standard. But I think, again, in terms of specifics, the people of Harlem who felt frustrated felt more like they weren't getting equal opportunities in their own space, not so much that other people were trying to intrude.
Good, thank you. Bill, I think this one is for you. Has there been an examination of the lack of survival income on debt? So yeah.
At our institute, we have basically three buckets that we focus on, and I really do encourage you to look at some of our work, particularly on wealth. And then we also have our labor workforce area, but they also do a lot of work in community impact, community resources. But with regard to the question around wealth, I don't think that we have gone that route yet. But it is interesting that the question comes up because I had asked, in the spirit of way of life, I've asked some of my folks that are doing our great wealth work, Lowell Ricketts and Anna Kent, to go beyond just some of the descriptive evidence on wealth differences by race and ethnicity and by gender and age, but to begin to tell that story of, well, what does it mean if you have this type of wealth, right? What does it allow you to do? And I think this gets at the question that's being asked. So we're actively working on that. Back on the question around teachers, one of the places I would recommend, and it's not perfect, but we're trying to make strides in that area, is that all of the regional banks. You have Washington D.C., the Board of Governors, but then you have 12 reserve banks. New York City has the New York area region, but each of those has an economics of education unit or a group, and they're tasked with trying to develop ways or improve the teaching. Again, it's narrow to our field, but to economics, and so there might be, if you're looking for solutions or approaches, that I would encourage you to go there to look at that. I mean, I spoke to a group of teachers, K through 12 teachers, that had come to the bank for a training for a few days. Some of you are also saying, when did the Federal Reserve start wanting to talk about race and ethnicity? Well, we have a race in the economy it's a broad across all the 12 regional banks, and one of the areas that we're working on is areas of teaching and again attracting minorities to the teaching profession. So we are acutely aware of this issue and are trying to make some strides.
Good, thank you. We're going to have to close out the question and answer session. We will post after today the questions online at the conference website, and that will allow people to have a little bit of a dialogue about them. The last question, though, was when we planned these workshops, do we ever think of including young people by inviting editors of college newspapers and such? Yes, we do, and over the summer we had a really great focus group with young people. We've been engaged with some students from the community, and we'll continue to do that. And I must say we had two fabulous interns, New York City interns, Olivia Chan and Devon Longley, who basically did the research, created the website, did the illustrations, and they were they did a superb job, and so young people are well represented. All right, now we have to move fast. We're going down. Oh, thank you guys. Are you coming up? Oh, then the next panel. Great, another fabulous employment and economic development panel. We're going to
gonna go this. I'm gonna go out this way. I was just pointing.
Oh.
This, yeah. What are you looking for? No, I'm gonna get one outside. Yeah. Okay. Before you.
We ready to start? We're ready to start? Okay. Hey, good morning, everyone. How are you all doing? Good morning, everyone. How are you all doing? Oh, okay. That's how we do it in Harlem. We talk. Okay, my name is Lloyd Williams. I'm proud to serve as the president of the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce. The Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce is this year celebrating its 125th anniversary. So the Chamber has seen a lot. I'll just say a few words and then open up to this extraordinary panel. My Harlem background is my family has been in this community since 1919. That is when my grandparents first came here. They came from the nation of Jamaica, and we have lived in this community in varying forms for that period. So my family now has its 6th generation in the Harlem community. Harlem is a magical place. It's an extraordinary place. And I have experienced some of the greatness of Harlem, first starting with my grandparents, and particularly my grandmother, who was an educator, who taught me so much about my culture, who made sure that we focused on education and we focused on community. I have been blessed beyond belief to have had the Honorable Percy E. Sutton to serve as my mentor for about 40 years. And Percy, he and I traveled around the world together, but spent a lot of time, of course, focused on the community of Harlem. Some of you know, I know some in the audience that Malcolm X was my godfather, and so through Malcolm X, there were so many experiences that I had. I'll be brief on this. My godfather, Malcolm X, on Saturdays when he was in New York, I would go meet him for breakfast at Shabazz number 7 on then Lenox Avenue between 116th Street and 115th Street. Sometimes he would take me to another breakfast meeting somewhere. And in those breakfast meetings, there might be clergy, there might be politicians, there might be the mafia, there might be the number runners, the persons in charge of civil rights, all different types of people. And I was a little kid, and Malcolm would have me sit in the corner. And inevitably, in the middle of the meetings, that would become very heated oft times because of varying opinions, someone would turn around and say, "Who's the kid?" And my godfather would say, "Don't worry about it, that's my godson." Now, what happened from that is something I'll share with you. When the meetings were over, Malcolm would debrief me. What did you learn? And oftentimes, I hit it on the head, but the most important thing, however, that I learned from that debrief is how important it is to be wrong. Oftentimes, we all want to be right. What I found out from the debrief is that I learned more when I was wrong, because I would tell him what I thought, and he would explain to me why I was looking at it the wrong way and what it is really about. So since that point in time, I've learned to not be concerned about being wrong, but being concerned about having a view and being flexible in your view so that you can mold it to grow. I also had an English tutor at St. Martin's Church at 122nd Street and then Lenox Avenue that my grandmother had me to go to. When grandma said, "Go do something," all you said was, "Yes, grandma," okay? I learned a lot from the tutor. It took me a few years, because I was a little kid, to understand that Mr. Hughes was important and that he was Langston Hughes, and I had that experience. So here's what I'm sharing with you. Harlem, when I know the panelists very well. I've known the panelists, some of them most of my life I've known them. And I know when we speak about Harlem, we are talking about something broader than between 96th Street and 155th Street from the Harlem River to Hudson River. We are talking about a state of mind. Harlem is a state of mind. And because Harlem is the symbolic capital of Black and brown America, Langston used to say, "As Harlem goes, so goes Black America." But when he said that, he was not dealing with the separation of the Hispanic-speaking community from the French, from the English. He was talking about the diaspora. And so as a result, that which we do in Harlem resonates to Cicero, Illinois, to Watts, LA, to the South Bronx, to Kingston, Jamaica, to East St. Louis. And so Harlem has a special place. And so what I would like to do, understanding the substance of this topic, is I would like to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves and say a little bit about themselves, and then we'll go to the subject of employment and economic development. So let me just say again, I do not like these types of formats. I run from them. Kevin Matthews knows that I do that. But when I heard that it was Arva, and when I heard it was Curtis, and when I heard it was Regina, who is Gigi to me, okay? When I heard it was Regina, I said, this is going to be something that I will learn from. So I am honored to ask our panelists if they would introduce themselves, and then we'll open up to deal with the subject matter. And I do not want the panelists to feel restricted in terms of what they say in their introduction. So Arva, I will start with you.
Good morning, everyone. As you heard, I'm Arva Rice, and I have the extreme privilege of serving as president and CEO of the New York Urban League. The New York Urban League was one of the organizations that provided testimony that we'll talk about a little bit more when we were going through and having the presentations after the riots. The New York Urban League is a long-term civil rights organization. We are over 102 years old, and our work is in education, employment, and advocacy. I am pleased to be the second woman to serve as CEO of the New York Urban League and look forward to having this conversation with you and talking a little bit more about how this report really had a huge impact on me and how some of the things are new, but some of the things unfortunately remain the same, and what that means for the Harlem of today and the Harlem of the future. So I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you. Ms. Phillips, I would love for you to introduce yourself.
Sure, I hope this is working. Hi, I'm Kim Phillips-Fine. I'm a historian. I teach at Columbia. I teach classes on both American political history generally and especially the history of New York, and I've written about New York, especially New York in the 70s and the fiscal crisis and its aftermath. And I just wanted to say how much I appreciate being here today and how honored I am to be here. I feel I'm mostly speaking from the perspective as a historian more than the reflections about, I think the history has a lot to teach us, but it's a different set of questions in some ways than what should happen now. But I'm very glad to see this event happening and also to have the chance to think together about how this history can shape the neighborhood and the city going forward.
Curtis.
Hello, everyone. Oh, yeah, okay, you can't hear me. I'm not originally from Harlem. I'm from, this is not Wakanda, but the BX. But I've been a Harlemite since 1980, so I've seen a lot of massive changes. I actually started my career in community development working under Mayor Dinkins at the New York City Department of Business Services. And all my jobs have been in that particular area since '89. And I'm so really, really blessed to be a resident of Harlem, notice the changes, and fundamentally with my job as president of Harlem Community Development Corporation, being able to maybe shape some of those changes for what I think is the good. But I don't do it alone. I have strategic partnerships, and they're right here on the stage here. Without them, I really couldn't get any of this stuff done. And of course, literally my mentor there, Lloyd Williams and the Greater Harlem Chamber, because it's a steadfast organization that, remember, put Harlem on the map with what? Harlem Day, which is now Harlem Week. So definitely, I'm really, really pleased to be sharing this stage with this panel. Thank you.
Gigi.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Regina Smith, Deputy Director of the Harlem Business Alliance. I'm working on special projects now, formerly the Executive Director, but I've come to a point in my life where it's time to scale down, move into retirement, and so we found a young, bright woman to pass the torch to, and that's what we need to do in all of our communities, is that we need to engage young, black, bright men and women to take on these roles and to become extremely active in our communities, because their talent, their passion, and their skills are sorely needed. I am a lifelong Harlem resident, and I care deeply about this community. And it has pained me to see how little progress we have made. And I am here today to share with you my observations and what I hope will happen given the gentrification that is happening in this community that did not need to occur in this community, because when you know that that is the plan, you're supposed to put together a strategy and implement a plan that would prevent that from happening. So I want to talk about Black economic empowerment, because that is what is sorely needed, and I look forward to this discussion.
Thank you. I just want to just comment briefly to Regina. Regina's mother, in my lifetime, I've met brilliant, brilliant people. Regina's mother, Noreen Clark Smith, in retrospect, and even at that time, was one of the most brilliant persons I ever met. And so as Regina correctly addresses the things that have not happened in Harlem and that should happen in Harlem, I will say to you, Regina, if not for your mother, if not for you, if not for Arver, if not for Curtis, just imagine what really would have happened in Harlem, okay? And so I don't want to downplay what we have done to weather the storm, but I further want to recognize that there's so much more that we need to do. And so let me then go, and I would just want to open up our conversation. Curtis, I'll start with you. Tell me what your view is on employment in Harlem. How do you see it? What's going on? What do you think should be happening?
Thank you, Lloyd. Well, certainly, as you know, with Harlem Community Development Corporation, our focus primarily had been real estate development and small business development. Realizing, especially with small business development, that's where the majority of employment opportunities are actually spring from. So we've been bullish on making sure that resources that we have to our avail are put there. As a matter of fact, funny enough, one of the organizations, Columbia University, in their expansion in West Harlem, Manhattanville, we are the recipients of $20 million over a 24-year period. But this money must not stay with Harlem CDC, but instead go back into the community, supporting nonprofits that have initiatives that speak to empowerment. Organizations such as the New York Urban League, such as the Harlem Business Alliance, those are organizations that we see fit the particular mission that we want, including, of course, the MEOC, the Manhattan Educational Opportunity Center, which provides a lot of the, let's say, workforce development initiatives that are so key. So with major real estate projects happening along 125th Street, such as the Victoria Theater, such as the National Urban League Empowerment Center, we actually have found that getting also employment trainers and providers to work on seeing that the people that when those projects actually come online, the people that who are actually working there are Black and brown and predominantly from this community. So it's a very, very important thing.
Thank you, Curtis. Arver, of everyone on the panel, I would believe, I'm sure, that the New York Urban League focuses on the issue of employment more so than anyone on this panel or the moderator. And you've done an extraordinary job. So tell us what you're seeing with employment and employment opportunities in Harlem and the future.
When it comes to employment opportunities in Harlem, it was a little bit jarring for me to read in the report that there was such a focus of Black people in the lowest wage jobs. and that was something that was calculated, that was a result of discrimination, that was a result of racism, and that's really something that was highlighted in the report, and here we are all these years later, and we still have that concentration. Unfortunately, when we did our State of Black New York, the New York Urban League publishes a report every year that talks about the state of Black New York. We had not released it in a number of years, but in celebration of our centennial in 2020, we released that, and we found that over 52% of New Yorkers, Black New Yorkers, still make $50,000 a year or less. When you talk about $50,000 a year in Mississippi, maybe that's something, but here in New York, and particularly here in Harlem, that's really a struggle, and the reason why that continues to happen is because of the employment opportunities that still are not available at the level that we would like them to have here in New York City, and particularly in Harlem. We still find our individuals still concentrated in the lower wage jobs, and so a lot of the work that we do with the New York Urban League is trying to make those connections between corporations and individual New Yorkers in order to provide them with job opportunities. And most recently created a diversity and inclusion lab that is made up of some of those individuals who, after George Floyd said, we want to eradicate racism. We think racism is bad, and so we're going to pledge 5 million, 20 million, 25 million. Well, we want to make sure that now that we're outside of George Floyd, now it's 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now, we can say, what did you actually do? Who are the individuals that you hired? What was your minority and diversity inclusion practices? What are the individuals, what are the affinity groups that you created in your organizations? And so that's part of our work, is making sure that those corporations who stood up and said that racism is bad, holding them accountable, and making sure that the moment that was created by that has a difference that didn't happen with the race riots in 1935.
Kim, let me go to you. You are a renowned author, Fair City, one of your publications, New York's Fiscal Crisis and the Rise of Austerity, Politics, etc. You are a finalist for a Pulitzer Prize. So there's a lot of knowledge you have. What are you seeing about economic development and economics in Harlem?
Well, I think actually, if it's okay, maybe I'll speak a little bit to the report.
It's totally okay.
Okay.
And by the way, anyone, go any way you want to go.
So I think actually one of the things which is really fascinating about the report and the original report, for anybody who hasn't had a chance to look at it yet, is the centrality that its authors gave to economic issues. They say that there's sections on housing, on health, on education, but in a way they come back and they say that the heart of the issue here is the difficulty that people in Harlem have in making a living. And they then go on to really frame this, and I think beautifully, it's a question of, in very political terms, that the issue is, in a way, that Black people are being excluded, actively excluded from working at the very economic institutions that they power, or that they depend upon and that they help to grow. And the report focuses especially on public utilities and documenting the very, very small numbers of Black people working for the public utilities in New York, and then also the subways. And in some ways, I think it's striking that they decided to focus on these. These are public services, public goods, things that people rely on in their daily lives, and that you can't not use. You have to use them. And yet, and so they're actually, Black use of these services is creating a huge amount of wealth and employment, but none of it, or very, very little of it, is going to Black Harlemites or Black New Yorkers in general. And I think that it's that kind of imbalance. It's not just a question of income levels or wages. It's really a question of power and who controls these institutions that the community relies on, that the community helps to grow, but then is suddenly shut out of when it comes to actually working and and participating in the wealth created by them.
Why is that?
Yeah, why is that? Well, I think it goes way back, and it has to do with, I think, both racism and power, and the operation of these institutions, and so it operates at many different levels. But I think at heart, it has to do with who controls them and for whom they benefit. And I guess this is I think one of the Professor Greenberg spoke to this at the end of the previous panel, but one thing which is very interesting about the report also is that the questions about gentrification that are so present today, those were very different. They operated, there was a different set of issues at that time. It was a question of really almost complete exclusion from the broader economic life of the city, whereas now the issues created by gentrification have to do with they have to do with people from the rest of New York, or from white New Yorkers, wealthier people coming in and wanting to live in this community and raising rents, all the issues that are created by gentrification, which are very different from those in the report. But there is this through line, which is it's a question of power and control. Who controls these resources? For whom do they operate? To what extent can the neighborhood, can Black New Yorkers, can Harlem residents benefit from what's happening in the neighborhood? So I think that question of power is really very constant, even though the particulars around it have changed. And actually, I just wanted to read one little quote from the report, which really struck me. No amount of charity, goodwill, social privileges, or political freedom can compensate for the enforced idleness and poverty of the citizens of this community. And I think that in some ways sums it up. It's a question, no amount of concessions or small benefits or goodwill or charity can really make up for that fact of exclusion and poverty. So I think that it's interesting. Despite all the things that have changed, there's this continuity that persists.
Well, let me mention to everyone, terminology. For so long, gentrification was an economic term. And over the past decades, it has now become a racial term. And so we need to understand that, because sometimes we're using words, we're not understanding the origin and the purpose and how they can shift as we talk about gentrification. But looking into the issue of economics and business, no organization has done more to foster business development and economic growth for the business and professional community than a Harlem Business Alliance under the leadership of Regina Smith and Walter Edwards. And so, Regina, if you would share your thoughts about what's happening with businesses, economics, or however you wish to approach it.
So it's been a struggle for Black entrepreneurs in the Harlem community, and I would say throughout the city and state. We represent Black people in New York City. We represent over 20% of the population, and before COVID, we had about maybe 3% of the businesses. That's untenable. You have to have strong businesses, and not just micro businesses, small, medium, large businesses in every community in order for those communities to thrive. We have found, and we know that Black people hire Black people in the highest percentages. When we seek jobs in companies and businesses that are not led by Black people, we're not hired at sufficient numbers to be able to support our communities. It's been a constant struggle. It's going to continue to be a struggle, trying to increase the number of Black people working for non-Black firms. So it really is incumbent upon us, and yes, we at the Harlem Business Alliance, we've butted heads with the Bloomberg administration, the de Blasio administration, and hopefully we'll be on the same page with this administration.
Excuse me, and God forbid, Giuliani administration.
Oh my God, you know, I mean, so none of them, frankly, were about black business empowerment or black economic empowerment, to be frank. So what we have to do is we have to put a lot of energy into creating and sustaining and growing black businesses. That's critical. When we have strong communities with a strong economic base and with a strong tax base, then we will then have good schools. We will educate our children the way they need to be educated. They're not being well educated and haven't been for years. When my mother sought schooling for us, and I'm going back to 1960, she couldn't find good schools in Central Harlem. We have a few now, but all of them should be excellent. Yeah. They should all be teaching STEAM, science, health, mathematics. Our children are bright. So what's going on in our New York City schools, and I know you have a panel and you're going to talk about that later on, but what I found when I was involved with schools here, I was on the school board and I was fighting the fight. We had a lot of paraprofessionals in our schools instead of educators, teaching assistants, teachers who had credentials. And yes, we absolutely need to have black teachers in the classrooms. And we need to have black superintendents. And they need to be held accountable. You can't produce failing scores year after year after year and remain in that position, which is what has happened in this community. We had superintendents who were in position for 12 years and were applauded, where our schools ranked at the bottom of city schools. But back to the economic issue, we have to absolutely change the dynamic and the focus if we are to move and be able to live and to own. There haven't been enough ownership opportunities here in this city. We're a rental community. Just about everyone rents. That's not tenable either. How do you build wealth if you don't own your property? Where is the access to capital? That has consistently been a problem, and it continues to be a problem. When I tried to buy a house, the community was redlined. I saved my peanuts. I saved my dollars. I grew up in the St. Nicholas Project, so I didn't come from a family with wealth. I couldn't rely on friends and families to help me to save the money that I needed in order to buy a home. It was difficult, and going to the bank really wasn't an option. I was looking for owners who were willing to take back a mortgage. That's how bad it was. And I had excellent credit. So things have gotten a little bit better, but in those 40 years, it hasn't become good enough. We have a lot of work to do. Let's address access to capital. Let's make it available to entrepreneurs so that they can build these businesses and turn around and hire people from within our community and change and to reduce these disparities that we are suffering from in education, in health, and also the way that we are policed.
Let me, I'm going to go to Curtis next. I want to pick up on a point that Regina raised. I am very focused and clear that the most important profession that exists in our community is the teachers. Every one of us here, help me on this, can reflect on part of your being here today is traced to a teacher or teachers who helped you along the way and gave you direction. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. So the respect for teachers is key. We talk about police. We want the police to live in our communities, the police who police us, and that's very important. But I would suggest that it's even more important to have the teachers who teach live in our communities, so they're walking past the families and the children, and they're interfacing with them. This other point, I go to Curtis. Curtis serves on the board of the Greater Harlem Chamber, and I'm honored that he is. One of the things, Regina, that Mayor Adams has asked the Chamber to do, and I know you will appreciate this because of years of struggle, he has asked the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce to adopt School District Number 5 in Central Harlem and to come up with some educational and development plans for School District Number 5. That's the first time any mayor has gone to the business or professional community in their area to ask them to step up to address that issue of education. So I'll reference that. Curtis, you had some comments you wish to share.
Yes, Lloyd. Definitely one of your heroes, one of my heroes. I won't tell you who said it. It kind of resonated with me, and I think it resonates with a lot of Harlemites who watch their community being transformed, not to their liking. And I believe that we should develop images of what I call the working city, a city that serves the needs and reflects the imaginations and visions of all its people. If only Harlem could become an area that retained its rich heritage while providing jobs, good housing, good schools, even better libraries, reliable and efficient municipal services, better parks and playgrounds. But he feared Harlem's transformation into a bourgeois vision of urban paradise, sanitized, full of shops, beautiful people, clean entertainment, museums, but devoid of risk and culture. You know who said that? Max Bond. So, and this is exactly what we're witnessing here, right in this community.
Explain who Max Bond is, please.
Max Bond was a renowned architect in Harlem who basically spearheaded a lot of the plenary sessions to discuss Harlem's ultimate redevelopment. As a matter of fact, Lloyd, referencing back in November of 2001, he actually put together a session along with UMES, which was fairly new at the time, coming on the fold, and the Urban Land Institute. And so, like I said, those are prophetic comments that, we all need to pay attention to.
In addition to his greatness, he is the architect of this institution, Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. The architect was Max Bond. Let me, Kevin, don't feel that you can't signal me when we need to start running. Time is critical for everyone. I'm gonna go to another direction, so I hope I don't embarrass anyone on the panel with this. And the question is, do you live in Harlem? And if you live in Harlem, why? And if you don't live in Harlem, why? Okay? So, Arva, I'll start with you.
I will let folks know that I proudly live in Harlem in a brownstone that I refer to as brownstone brown girls. My sister and I lived there together for about 15 years. I was not born in Harlem, but I got here just as soon as I can. When I was in college, I took a course called The Great American City. And in that coursework, I read about not only New York City, but a very special place called Harlem. And living in the Midwest, I fell in love with a city that I'd never seen. And when I came to New York and I started to walk down the streets, I was literally looking for, I was like, where is, Madam C.J. Walker? I'm gonna get my hair pressed. And I was just like, Arva, that was a historicals class that you took? That is not happening right now. But I was just so excited to come to Harlem and to be able to be here, to be able to be in a brownstone, like I said, with my sister, and to be connected with the individuals who are just, icons and heroes here in the city. One of the things that I think that's different in the report than what's happening right now is, as I read through that report, one of the things that we didn't have in 1935 and 1936 is we didn't have the agency, we didn't have Lloyd Williams, we didn't have the Harlem Business Alliance, we didn't have the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce, and so as a result, we didn't have Mayor Adams, we didn't have Inez Dinkins, we didn't have Letitia James, and so as a result of both the individuals and the institutions that have been created at that time, we have a higher level of responsibility, and I just wanted to share that as well.
Thank you so much. Kim, I'll pose the same question to you.
Right. Well, no, I don't live in Harlem, actually. I grew up in Brooklyn, kind of downtown Brooklyn. But I live near Washington Square Park downtown. And I guess the real reason I live there is maybe of interest, which is that my husband teaches at NYU, so
that's a good reason.
So we have subsidized housing, so we are actually outside. It was subsidized and somewhat rent stabilized housing, but we are very fortunate in that because of working for an academic institution. We are essentially outside of the New York City housing market. And I will say, grateful for that every day because I can see very clearly in neighbors and friends and people's experiences the challenges that come from being a tenant and not having control over your rent and having the experience of it going up that it can be yanked out under you at any moment. And I think, Columbia also has a program of rent subsidies for faculty, and I think it would be nice if they extended that to more of the people who work for the university. Same for NYU, where it's not even all faculty, only certain faculty have access to these programs. Anyway, but I think it's a broader question about, in a way, it's rent stabilization and the question of what makes for affordable housing.
I'm going to stick with you for a moment. So,
but that's my story.
No, I thought that was excellent. The question, give us a correlation between rent and the economic impact on families.
Oh, well, I think rent is the largest, it's the largest bill that you pay, really, and it's not just, I think it also has to do with the uncertainty that you face and the stress that can come about from not knowing what the rent will be in any, 1 year to the next. And in parts of the city where there is a rapid influx of wealth, that can become extremely stressful. So that's, I think rent, for having a stable family life and a home that you commit to and a neighborhood that you commit to, and I love that description of the working city. I think that does really articulate what a positive vision for the city as a whole is, that having some sense of the stability that rent protection provides is absolutely key. And ownership is one way to do that, but rent protections are another. So,
Curtis, to you, let me go back to the question. Do you live in Harlem, and if so, why?
Well, remember I told you I'm originally from the Boogie Down, but I have been a Harlemite since 1980. I literally graduated from Mercy College, 79. Then I went back briefly to live with my folks in Co-op City in the Bronx. And then he said, I got to do something. I got to get out of here. And so literally, you mentioned your godfather. Well, my roommate from college actually dated his daughter, Attila. Mm-hmm. And so she had a connection to a friend who knew this apartment on 143rd Street. And lo and behold, 143rd Street, 1980, moved in there with my now ex-friend, but that's another story. But I have been there since 1980, and I have to say, can you say HPD, and more precisely, HDFC co-op? So I'm in a 7-room HDFC apartment. And if you know the history of the HDFC program, I will not tell you how much it cost, and that's why I'm in Harlem.
Well, before I bring the question to Regina, because I know the answer to the first part of the question, did you really think you had to drop that 7-room thing on us? I mean, here we all trying to figure out how we're going to deal with what my man dropped 7 rooms on us.
I never said the price. Never said the price.
Okay. Regina, obviously, you live in Harlem, and I'm honored that you're my neighbor. We're 1 block away from each other and work with our block associations. Regina heads up the 130th Street homeowners, and I serve as president of 131st Street Block Association. But Regina, tell us why you live in Harlem.
Oh my goodness. Because I love black people and I love living around black people.
Yeah.
And I love living around black Harlemites. I just love it. I mean, I lived in Paris for a year, and I just missed black people. I miss the brothers with their deep voices. You know, I mean, Frenchmen sing. It's a different kind of, you know, it's a different kind, you know, and I mean, so I miss that bass. So, yes, I just love it. I just, you know, I just feel energized and I feel comforted and I feel safe. I just like the rhythm. I like the music. I like the way people walk. I like the way they talk. You know, I like the way they dress. I just love it. You know, I just love it.
Well, I'll simply say, I walk each day past queens and kings in Harlem. And oftentimes we may not know their names, and we may not know who they are, but they are kings and they're queens. And I walk past these little royal children in Harlem. And yes, they may be bad, but what group of children do you know that doesn't have some of those things about them? And I walked in Harlem past Joe Louis and Jackie Robinson and Max Roach and Maya Angelou, James Baldwin, and I mean, we were walking past each other. We didn't know who they were, okay, but we knew they were special. And so what I'm saying is that there are some important people in this auditorium right now. And we oftentimes look to who has the mic, who's seated on the dais. But the most important person in this audience right now is the person sitting next to you, the person sitting in front of you, the person sitting in back of you, because you have something in common. Percy Sutton once told me, Arva, when I was asking him about what was going on in the community, and a short version, he said to me, well, Lloyd, the key word is the word common. And I said, well, Mr. Sutton, explain that to me. So I want you to hear what he told me, and I repeat this so others can hear it. He said, well, Lloyd, the foundation is the word common, Arva. He said, and if you understand what you have in common, you will become communal. Now, what does that mean? Everyone in this auditorium has something in common. You're in this auditorium right now. You are also communal because you came together around some information that attracted you. So he said, if you know what you have in common, you'll become communal. If you become communal, you will communicate. And if you communicate, you will have a community. And so the foundation of those 4 words was common. And oftentimes why we don't have the community that we want to have is we're not communicating. And part of that is those 4 or 5 locks we have on our doors, how they've gotten us to be afraid of our own neighbors and afraid of our own children, and therefore not talk to each other. And that's why the format that you hear now is terribly important to you. So let's communicate. And let me then turn this to you, Arva. Share with us anything you wish to related to economic development, related to employment, or related to whatever is on your mind.
Well, I spoke to it a little bit before, and like I said, the difference in between what happened with the race riot in 1935 and what happened with George Floyd is that we had cameras, we had social media, COVID was in place, and so more people saw it at the same time, and so they couldn't deny it. Somehow in 1935, they were able to, in 1936 when the report was supposed to be released, there was the mayor at that time was able to not release that. Can you imagine that? At this particular time, right? In this particular moment in time, we would hold a mayor accountable for making sure that that report was released. So we have a different level of agency as Black people. We have a different level of allyship when it comes to white people who are more concerned about our issues. And so I think that the differences that we have between when the report was published and where we are now today brings a higher level of accountability. And so I just want us to think about, when it comes to economics, when we think about providing that support for Black small businesses, which are so incredibly important. I'm the child of an entrepreneur. I would not be sitting here today if it was not for my father's business that sent every single one of his kids to college when he picked cotton. And so the investment that we need to do right now, we are able to do it because of the agency that we have. And so I just encourage us all to step up to the plate.
But I'll say one thing to you, and when I talk about community, etc., I met your cotton-picking father. And no, that's key. That's key. I was honored to meet him when he came up with your mother. And the fact that I know that Noreen Clark Smith and what she stood for, I know Curtis' family. His wife and I are born on the same day, in fact. And that's important. And Kim, I am, through this meeting, getting to know you. And I'm honored to be able to get to know you also. Let me then ask if we would do this. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to take 2 or 3 minutes to give us any wrap-up comment you have, and I'll end with Arva. So, Regina, if I can start with you.
I think the role of the government in creating policies that can positively impact our community is critical. We need to understand that, and we also need to understand language, terminology, and policies. And the policies that haven't helped us are affirmative action, MWBE procurement goals, that stands for minority and women-owned businesses. The definition is way too broad for us to, those policies to benefit Black people, and actually they haven't. So when you look at MWBE spending, the bulk of that money goes to white women, followed by Asian businesses, and then there are Latino businesses that they come in third, and Black people are all the way at the bottom. Mind you, we have fought the fight. We've been at the forefront of these battles for all of these various policies that basically are benefiting everyone else and not us. So we need to be real clear about language, and as Black people, we need to feel real comfortable being laser focused on the needs of Black people, because we are suffering. Our children are dying. Our communities are evaporating. You name it, every possible ill our community is suffering from. So let's be laser focused on, not on Black people, Talking about people of color and communities of color and minorities, that doesn't work for us because we dissipate our energy and our time and our resources by looking out for everyone else and not for ourselves. And I have to go back quickly to that example where they say if you're on a plane and the plane is, is going through some turbulence and, the mask comes down, what do they tell you to do? Put that mask over yourself first. Okay, your children second, and then you can look out for other people on the plane. That isn't what we or our elected officials have done. They look out for everybody on the plane. And sometimes they don't get back to us, and they certainly don't get back to our children. So that has to stop. Let's be clear, Black people. Let's be focused, Black people, and let's do what we have to do to get out of this morass that we're in.
Curtis.
Yes, thank you for that, Regina. I definitely look at my role, because I've now served 5 different governors, because remember I came in under 2006. So certainly getting a quick education to Harlem, the politics there, and thank you, Lloyd, for that. That understanding that as a government agency, a state government agency, I need to fall back, and I need to listen, and I need to actually find out what is on the ground happening, so that we can act, as opposed to trying to impose someone else's vision of what we think it should be. So I thank you guys for really, really pulling my coattails, so to speak, in that. As you know, Lloyd, we have the projects along 125th Street, real estate projects, and of course we own the Apollo Theater. We also own the Victoria, which is being transformed, and they call it a transformational project. So, and a National Urban League. I hope to actually see that those come to completion, and I look to maybe chart a new chapter in my life, because 5 governors. What else? There has to be something else, right? So I'm really looking to devote more time to exploring and answering questions about how we can actually make things more equitable and fair in a community like Harlem. So that's going to be my focus and my mission going forward. Thank you.
Kim, talk to us.
Well, I think actually I'll maybe just end by going back to the report briefly. And I think actually Arva's words made me think I believe there were no Black city council members during the 1930s.
That's correct.
That is, so the
first ones came in the mid-40s.
Yeah, in the 40s, and I think that the report, both its existence and what happened to it, speaks to questions about political power. I think the report exists partly, and you can see this in the membership. People like A. Philip Randolph had come up through the Socialist Party and published a socialist newspaper in the late teens and early 20s, financed partly with his wife's money, his wife being an entrepreneur. So he, and just the other members of the report reflect a level of political organizing in the neighborhood. Of course, the events around the riot itself reflected the presence of the Communist Party in the neighborhood. And I think both what happened in the creation of the report, but then also its suppression, reflects both a level of political organization and the lack of it. And so I think in a way that is one of the issues that Harlem and the city as a whole is going to face going forward, are questions about just levels of political organization, political mobilization. The Times today reports another fiscal crisis imminent, and I think the question of how to preserve public services in the face of calls for retrenchment will be very important in the years to come. So.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Arva.
Regina said it so well that I don't think there's a whole lot to be spoken after that, but the truth is that in this particular time and moment, we still have problems with access to capital. We still have schools that aren't educating our children the way that they should. We still have issues around police interaction and issues around housing and gentrification and affordability of New York City. And yet, we are living lives that our grandmothers never could have imagined. And so I encourage us all to walk with that and to walk with that hope and with that responsibility.
Thank you. Let me bring us to closure. By the way, I want to acknowledge that there is this brilliant lawyer who is a Harlem resident and an educator and also was a city official. And when he was a city official dealing with small business development, he did a brilliant job. So I just want to acknowledge Wallace Ford is in the house. Okay? Let me close on what Arvis said. Let me close on Regina's comment. I want to be very clear on what I'm saying. We fight battles, and oftentimes it is the darker-skinned people who fight the battles and the lighter-skinned people who get the benefit of that battle. We oftentimes hear about what the Jewish community did to help us during the civil rights campaigns. And yes, they did, but they were not allowed in those colleges also. So they were fighting for their own interests as well as ours. They were not allowed in certain housing. They were fighting for their interests as well as ours. As we look at the jobs that were not available to black people, many of those jobs are not available to persons who were Jewish. So they were fighting for our interests, but more importantly for theirs. I want to be very clear. I have no problem with that. I think to what Regina said, you are supposed to fight for your interests first. I have no problem. But here's the point. MBE, Regina's mother, Wallace, myself, we fought for decades for minority business development, minority business enterprise, MBE, and we were opposed. Every obstacle was put in our way as we fought for MBE. But then some other forces came about and said, you know, if we call this MWBE, we could support that. So what did that mean? They then put women into it, the terminology women. And of course, it started becoming a gender battle, whether women should be in it. But here's what happened. By making it MWBE, they took the majority of America, the majority, that is white women, and they made them a minority. Okay? So all of the programs that was structured for minorities now became open to white women. And so what did the white men do? They put their wives' names on the businesses, their cousins' names on the businesses, their children's name on the businesses. And now you hear about this whole big support for MWB, and we say small business, and someone says, well, define a small business. And then they start defining a small business that if you have 5,000 employees or less, meaning we're eliminated from that process. So I close by saying this. Regina said it. We need to understand the art of communication. You do not need to be Being pro-black does not mean you're anti-white. We got to understand that. Because did we hear, well, why are you always talking about black? Why are you always bringing up black? You always talking about black because the greater needs and the greater concerns and the greater victims are those who happen to be black. And so until we start understanding that we have that commonality, and we can be white, we can be black, we can look at it differently. But if we don't understand that what happens to one will trickle down to the other, then all we need to do is look at January 6th. And you think that that cannot repeat itself? So one look, pay attention to the Ken Burns series that's being done on the Holocaust in America. And everything, Regina, that he said, that when Hitler was in jail, he studied what happened in America. That's how he built that base. When they talk about concentration camps, he looked at what they did in America with the Native Americans. That's how he put that together. Pay attention to that. How they removed them from their land, how they put them on reservations. And anybody who has not been to a reservation in America today, the correlation between a reservation and a concentration camp is striking when you go there. So at the end of the day, when you see Regina Smith walking past you, please say thank you. Please say thank you. Please say, hey, how you doing? If you see a Kim Phillips, she doesn't have to be here. Say thank you to Kim Phillips. When you see a great Oliver Rice, sometimes I see Oliver Rice running down the street in the early morning of the day, late at night, and I stop her to say, sis, how you doing? Okay? And Curtis Archer, who's been a stalwart in our community. And so, without further ado, we thank you for your time. I would appreciate it if you would give a hand to our panel. They're asking if we just stand up right here and take a photo. How's that girl doing? How's grandma doing?
I'm trying to keep up with them. You know, with
You know I know it. Oh, yeah.
boys,